Slave of Christ. Excited about this video. It's going to take me a little while to get it out, but what it is the history of Jesus and Israel condensed within Genesis chapter 50. And the way I started out was I was focusing on these numbers. I've been studying on it, and then I started looking at keywords and looking them up in the Strong's Concordance, getting the root word. And what I found was kind of fascinating to me, and I just wanted to share it with y'all. I see 40, 70, 7, 110, and 110. And I said, okay, 40, 70, and 7 is related to Israel, but what about 110? Well, the 110, I said, well, 40 and 70 is 110. That's kind of the history of Israel concerning them numbers. And I said, well, now it concerns Joseph and his death, but why is it mentioned twice within 4 verses? And I realized that just the blessing that Jacob gave to Joseph, Joseph's 2 children was Ephraim and Manasseh, because Joseph got the birthright. So now it's on Manasseh and Ephraim. But so once I found that out, and it's kind of just a little bit there, but then the rest of the pieces come together. And I'll give you the verses, and because line it up with prophets in the Old Testament, and then a couple of things in the gospel. But here it says in verse 2 that embalmed Israel. Okay, the word embalmed, looked it up, and it means to ripen. And talking about Israel, and here as well as Jacob, they interchanged his name, and God allowed Jacob to live this long to see that the nation grew like it has been growing, because Abraham received the calling. I associate Israel with the fig tree, and it started budding with Abram, if you would, and throughout the lineage, and then now Jacob sees his son and his grandsons, and he sees that the nation of Israel is coming, to blossom like the covenant that God gave him. The word is coming true here, where Abraham never did see it, that Jacob did. And then this also applies to the nation itself as Israel, because then in verse 3 it says 40 days were fulfilled for him, and as well as his name is Israel, as with the nation, because immediately when they finally got into their nation, it took them 40 years in the wilderness to be fulfilled before they come a nation. So there's the 40 years as days or years, or 1,000 years, depending on how the translation is in the Bible, but it goes for both of them. And then you come to Egyptians mourned, and then 70 days. Well, that is 70 days. Now, Egyptians were the strong power at that time. So let me tell you about a time when Israel was the nation, was in their land, and then the 70 that was associated with them when Babylon come and took them captive for 70 years. And they were mourning them 70 years being away from Jerusalem, not to be able to practice their feast. And then, after they come back, here in verse 5 is die and the word grave. Well, we relate that to after 70 AD, they died from being a nation. They were all scattered out everywhere. And if you fast track real quick to the Holocaust, and this verse, a couple verses I want to read you is concerning the Holocaust. A lot of scholars associated with it, and especially all the Jewish rabbis. But the Valley of Dry Bones there in Ezekiel 37, that where they dead went to the grave. But here the specific verses 11 and 12, it says, these bones are the whole house of Israel. So it connects to these bones as Israel. And then in verse 12, thus saith the Lord God, behold, O my people, I will open your graves and cause you to come out of your graves and bring you unto the land of Israel. And very significant, that's where I connect those words. And then at the end of verse 5, it says, we'll come again. Will Israel become a nation again in 1948? And when that happened, after that, all the Jews started coming back from distant lands, even from America, just multitudes of people. And what they can call the second Exodus is more people than this first Exodus was. Millions and millions of Jews coming back in the land. And there we see it in verse 8 and verse 9. It says, all the house of Joseph, all his brethren, all his father's house. And in verse 9, a very great company. So we see them coming back as a nation, kind of in kind of hidden code right here. And then in verse 10, we see mourning in 7 days. Well, we know now that they're back as a nation now, that they have a 7-year period ahead of them called the tribulation that they're going to have to go through. And then in verse 12 and 13, I seen sons, and then in verse 13, whenever I read son, to me, it pops in my mind Jesus. And then the word Machpelah, well, I looked it up and it means to fold. The Hebrew root word, if you want, I'll give it to you, but it goes to H4375. It means a fold, and the root word to that is 3717, meaning twofold, repeat, or double. So what would come to my mind is a piece of paper and just fold it in half. Well, now we have a crease and we have 2 columns. It's the side here and the side here is like double, but they're the identical. But it's 2 different pieces. So I said, okay, well, there's 2 stories here, and one of them's pointing to Jesus. I just gave you the one about Israel. And then the word repeat come to my mind. It brings me up as a joke of coming up in high school. Pete and repeat, we're in a boat. Pete fell out, who's left? And you'd have to say the joke over. So I went back and I looked for Jesus. Well, immediately in verse 1, the story of Joseph and Israel, well, that's a father and a son. Okay, so Jesus is the son and God the Father. So made that connection. Then in verse 2, we read physicians. Physician is mentioned twice. So what I found, I went to the book of Luke, the physician, and found that Jesus in red letters where he spoke and mentioned the word physician twice. And one was in Luke 4, he said that physician, heal thyself. And then in Luke 5, it says, they that are whole need not a physician, but they that are sick. And also I got a note on that back up in the verse 1. The rabbis believe in the Mashiach as 2 different people. One Mashiach being Joseph and one Mashiach being David. And that's the word Joseph, so that's also a representation of Jesus the Messiah, the son of Joseph, as the suffering servant that he's already come, and he comes back as a conquering king, as in King David. And that's the 2 references that the Jews make. Alright, then down in verse 3, as soon as Jesus come on the scene, when he was baptized, he spent 40 days in the wilderness. He had to fulfill 40 days in the wilderness in verse 3. And then at the end of verse 3, there's the 70 again. So I looked up in Strong's Concordance and brought me to Matthew 18, verse 22. And it read in red letters, Jesus said unto him, I say not unto thee 7 times, but until 70 times 7. Where he's speaking to Peter about forgiveness. And then in verse 5, I connected grave. Okay, we know Jesus died and he was buried in the grave, as considered the grave. He went down to the grave. But let me read this to you from a prophecy in Isaiah 53 and 9. He made his grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death. There's the 2 words. And it it got all over me. But then wait till you get this last one here. So Jesus died. And then at the end of verse 5, I will come again. Well, Jesus is going to come back again one day, and that's what we're waiting for now. And when he does, there it is in verse 9 with a very great company and horsemen. The word horsemen is in there because you read over there in Revelation 19 that he comes back on white horses. We're all on white horses, a great army. And it's going to be a great multitude. In there in verse 10, that is for Jesus and Israel as well. There's the threshing floor, that is a symbolism of the harvest of wheat, and that goes through the tribulation. That's for the Jews. And the word mourning, atad, and 7 days, that's the 7-year tribulation. They're going to be mourning. But another thing, I made a connection with that word atad, that the root word, if you look it up in the Strong's Concordance, it means to pierce or thorn. So that's directly associated with Jesus right then, and that's even more. And that was H329. But let me give you in Zechariah 12:10, this is what happened. This is the prophecy. They shall look upon me, talking about Jesus, they shall look upon me whom they have pierced, and they shall mourn for him as one mourneth for his only son. And there it is, the return of Jesus, because they're going to look at his palms. He's going to have holes in his palm and his hand. He's going, where you get them wounds? I got them wounds at the house of my friends. And there's the history right there. It's just very, very, and it stunned me very greatly. And then I can go on with the churches, and it's the latter verses that these words, I'll just give it to you real quick. That pray thee the trespass of thy brethren or sin, that they do not unto evil unto thee, and pray thee forgive the trespass of the servant. That's kind of what Jesus said on the cross. Forgive them, for they know not what they say or doing. You know, I'm kind of paraphrasing, but I'm just going from the scriptures right here. And from there the church was birthed, and in verse 18, 19, brethren, servants, the brothers of Jesus, and we're his brother, and we're supposed to be servants. And even James, he rejected Jesus during his ministry. He was even his half-brother. And later, there's a book in the Bible from James. He says a servant of Jesus Christ, so there's the word servant. And then the place of God is in verse 19, as the church is in, you know, it's not heresy, but the church is in the place of God right now preaching the gospel. And in verse 20, to save much people, that's the duty of the church, you know. And it's a lot of parallels right there, and there might be more, but it just really shocked me to find them on Jesus and Israel. And then, you know, with them key words that we don't even know what the meaning are, and we come complacent, we just read through it, and hey, let's check it out, and we might be astonished a little bit. But that's it. I didn't want to go this long on the video, but I hope y'all got a blessing out of it. And I got another one coming up about angels, and it's going to be real good as well. And just thank y'all for following, and love y'all.